And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, Send me away, that I may go to my own place, and to my country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know my service which I have done for you. And Laban said to him, Please stay, if I have found favour in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Then he said, Name me your wages, and I will give it. So Jacob said to him, You know how I have served you, and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now, when shall I also provide for my own house? And he said, What shall I give you? And Jacob said, You shall not give me anything, if you will do this thing for me. I will again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and the speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come. When the subject of my wages comes before you, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the lambs, will be considered stolen, if it is with me. And Laban said, Oh, that it were according to your word. So he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hand of his sons. Then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. May the Lord bless these words to us. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we continue the story of Jacob as he wrestles to establish his own household. He had wrestled with his brother and deceived him. The Lord nevertheless came to Jacob and promised to be with him and to bring him back to the land of Canaan. Here he is, living around Haran, north of Canaan, having worked for his uncle Laban, and earned 2 wives, and between them they had produced at this stage 11 sons and 1 daughter, in a relatively short period of time. And so Jacob is now concerned that he must provide for his future, and so he comes to Laban and says, I've worked for you, now I have the family, I have this responsibility, let me go and provide for them, that I might not be your servant forever. But Laban objects. He says, Please stay. I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. The reality was that although Laban had flocks and herds, they had not been very productive under his own sons before Jacob came. Jacob had worked and cared for the sheep very diligently. They had greatly multiplied. And so Laban was now much more wealthy than he had been just 15 years earlier. He recognizes the value that Jacob has been to him, and he doesn't want to let him go. He is thinking of himself, though. He is not thinking of his children or his grandchildren through his daughters. He is thinking of his own estate. But he freely confesses, and Jacob affirms what he says. What you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming, and now when shall I also provide for my own house? If goods increase, it is the Lord's blessing and the Lord's provision. And this is in accord with the promise that was given to Jacob. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. Laban had blessed Jacob, and God had blessed Laban. It was very clearly a sign that the Lord was with Jacob, for Jacob came with that account of his dream, and with his knowledge of Abraham and Abraham's faith and Isaac's faith, and a commitment to the Lord. And at the same time as he worked, the Lord blessed the work of his hand. And so there was no contradicting the fact that the Lord was with Jacob. But Laban wants him to stay. What shall I give you? Jacob says, well, you don't need to give me anything. I'll look after your flocks. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the speckled and spotted among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So he says, let us just divide the flock. I'll take the speckled and spotted ones, and you can take the plain ones, and it will be easy to distinguish my sheep from your sheep, because mine will all be speckled and spotted. And so there won't be any argument. And Laban agrees. But immediately he goes to the flock first and takes out all the speckled and spotted ones, the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white on it, all the brown ones among the lambs. He took the ones that he had just agreed should be Jacob's, and gave them to his sons, and sent them away 3 days' journey, a long way away, and left the plain ones with Jacob. So again Jacob was cheated. We continue the account in verse 37 though. Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar, and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs, where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then Jacob separated the lambs, and made the flocks face toward the streaked, and all the brown in the flock of Laban. But he put his own flocks by themselves, and did not put them with Laban's flock. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feeble were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Well, Laban had thought he had outsmarted Jacob, but Jacob knew his sheep. Laban didn't know his sheep. While we don't fully understand what's happening with these rods, we do recognise plainly modern sheep breeding practices in Jacob identifying the sheep which were strong, the ones that he wanted, and he bred them, and he kept them separate from the others. And that's the key of modern sheep breeding, making sure that the desirable ones breed together and are separated away from the rest of the flock. And so the stronger ones were Jacob's, and by putting the rods near the water, not only was he separating the flocks, but he was also using the genetics of the coat colour to identify them as his sheep. And we find later that Jacob testifies the Lord gave him wisdom and directed him in what he was doing. And so the Lord again blesses Jacob, so that his livestock increase, and his servants increase, as well as camels and donkeys. He is able to build up a substantial herd of his own, which he keeps separate from Laban's, but he maintains Laban's according to the contract. And so Laban's plan has backfired. Laban thought he could keep from Jacob his wages, but the Lord has given Jacob his wages. The Lord was with Jacob, so that as he worked diligently, there was fruit from his labour. There was material blessing. And the Lord blessed others for Jacob's sake, the principle being that those who bless God's people, God will bless, and those who curse God's people, God will curse. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labour is not in vain in the Lord.